is Capt.S.S.Chaudhari. Today I am going to speak about Note of Protest and Letter of Protest. Note of Protest is a very important document and instrument and tool for the ship's master. He must understand when to note a protest and when to issue a letter of protest. Well, Note of Protest is a declaration in rem. In rem in Latin means declaration in general. It is not directed to a person, to the world at large. It is not directed towards an individual or an individual office. So basically it is noted in apprehension of a danger or a damage to the ship or cargo. The note should be as small, clear, brisk and specific as possible. Unnecessary implications or imaginations or outcomes should not be stated. It should, in very brief, explain the reason of apprehension of the damage or danger. Note of protest should be extendable to a later date if required. Note of protest may not be considered as a legal document in certain countries at least, but definitely it gives a lot of strength to circumstantial evidence. It proves that there was an apprehension and that the circumstances were such that the master and crew, with all their efforts, couldn't have prevented the damage. Note of protest should be filed within 24 hours of arrival port before breaking the bulk, as they usually say, and it should have a support of log entries, weather reports, etc. An appropriate weather report and proper log entries, with probably the ships in vicinity also describing the same weather, the direction of the ship, the course, etc. All the relevant entries of the logbook can probably justify that the weather was of that extent that even if proper lashings were taken, even if all the precautions were taken in respect of seamanship, etc., the damage would occur. So far what we have learned about the note of protest is note of protest, declaration in rem, in apprehension of danger. In 24 hours of arrival, it should be notarized. Circumstances beyond master's control, for that matter, anybody's control. It should be witnessed by people in addition to the master's signature. Note of protest should be made at least in the following circumstances. First, considering the bad weather, the rough weather or the heavy weather. It might so happen that you have made ventilation channels for, say, bagged cargo, for example rice or cocoa beans. Cocoa beans you need 10 layer changes per hour. And when we carry rice, particularly from a warm climate to a cold climate, you need thorough ventilation. If the ventilation is stopped, probably the cargo will get bad. So there might be a situation where you could not ventilate. For example, from Ivory Coast you are carrying bagged cocoa beans to European ports, and ventilation is needed, and passing through English Channel or so, you are not able to ventilate, you are not able to do the thorough ventilation. Say you had cowl type ventilator, where ventilators have to be directed in the direction of wind and away from the direction of wind, and with shipping seas you could not do the ventilation. Then there is a possibility of damage. There is a sure shot possibility of damage. Whether the channels are collapsed or you could not do the ventilation, in either case the cargo will get damaged. Let's take another situation. You're carrying general cargo and probably in rough weather you thought that the lashings might have broken, the cargo might have got shifted. In such situations also, before you open the hold, just because of the apprehension of the damage, you can note the protest. Another situation is, say, in bad weather while pitching heavily, you thought that you might have hit a bank or seabed, or while approaching a port where it was not expected, you encounter, say, close pancake ice and you expect that there might be damage to the hull. You could note a protest. The third situation could be when there is discrepancy between the content of a charter party and the effect For example, in the charter party, it might be stated or agreed that the ship will be safely aground. In this term safely aground, the safely is quite relative. For example, you might be aground and thereafter the tide falls by 1 centimeter, or you might be aground and thereafter the tide falls by 1.5 meter. The implications are different. The stress on the hull is different. In a situation like that, it might so happen that as the vessel is aground, not only the vessel is aground, the vessel gets listed also. So this is a typical example where I tell my students that in apprehension of the hull damage, you might note a protest. You might note a protest that the vessel was supposed to be safely aground, but this is not safe anymore. And you might also issue a letter of protest. There is a possibility that certain component of the lifting gear may part, because the cargo gear is supposed to operate effectively and efficiently when there is no list or the list is minimal. A fourth situation in which the master must note a protest is a situation of general liability to save the ship or property or cargo of different owners, different stakeholders. Parties have to be informed, and in these situations you also must, as a master, note a protest and inform owners that on your behalf inform the parties concerned. So whether a legal requirement or not, whether its legal standing is there or not, I would suggest that every master who has apprehension of damage to the ship or cargo in a situation where the things are beyond anyone's control, it shouldn't happen in the course of arbitration that an arbitrator points it out to the master, says, "Captain, you never thought that you should note a protest. You never had any apprehension of damage to the ship." So that would sound very odd. Now let's look at the format of note of protest. In different countries there are different formats. There is no one standard format, but essentially what a note of protest should have is, say, name of the ship, identification number, on which date you sailed out, with how much cargo, what is the departure date, arrival date. In other words, the note of protest states in extreme brief the information regarding the ship and the voyage and the cargo details, and the apprehension that, fearing the loss of damage to cargo owing to, say, bad weather, master notes the protest against all perils, dangers, casualties and occurrences of all nature or kind whatsoever, and loss or damage thereby occasioned, reserving the right to extend the protest in times and places convenient. So this is the apprehension made by the master in the note of protest. A statement in respect of the truthfulness and correctness of the statement, and then signatures of witnesses, master, notary public with attestment of notary. Letter of protest. Letter of protest is a letter which is directed in personam. That means it is directed towards an individual or a particular office, and this letter of protest is not given in the apprehension of future damage or possible damage. It is caused because of non-performance of party or wrongful act of the party concerned. So message is conveyed to an individual or an individual office in respect of non-performance of duty or doing a wrong act. It means whether you talk about non-performance or wrongful act, it can be prevented. The occurrence can be prevented by the party concerned. So it is a cautionary letter of protest to other party, stating that something needs to be done or something has to be prevented so that the business can go on smoothly. It doesn't have to be notarized like note of protest, and it is not a situation which is in nobody's control. It is a situation which can be controlled by the party whom the letter is addressed. Although it's a formal letter, you don't have to notarize it, you don't have to have witnesses. It's an official letter. To start with, it is a letter of intimation basically. If needed, The supplementary documents can be supplied afterwards whenever there is further inquiry. The letter of protest may be given by a merchant or a third party to the master. Say for example, master is not behaving in appropriate manner as per the charter party. Master is not sailing the ship with due dispatch. Master is not signing the bills of lading as is required by the charter party, and so on. But it is very important to understand that master should issue the letter of protest in various situations where the owner's interests may be jeopardized. Master should issue the letter of protest in situation where it is probably the charter's mistake or it is not the mistake of owners that the ship has to wait. Say for example, ship is waiting for orders, ship is waiting for berthing, cargo has not arrived, and probably during the berthing some accident or incident has occurred, ship has incurred some damage. There is some obstruction to the smooth running of the business, and it is not the owner's fault. It is probably a third party's fault, say stevedore's fault, say charter's fault. It is fault of not informing something in time. It is fault that a certain party, say for example stevedore and his gang, is not arrived in time. It is probably a delay which is caused because of lack of documentation in time. So all these situations, they need a master to issue a letter of protest. So letter of protest which is addressed to an individual or an individual firm, it may contain, say for example, a discrepancy of cargo figures, or it might be issued in case of receiving of a fuel that is not of appropriate standard. Now if it so happens that after you have used the fuel, the engine performance has come down, or the parameters are showing a reduced performance of the engines, or some unhealthy sound is coming from the machinery spaces. So in such situation, you can issue the letter of protest stating that you will hold the charters responsible for any subsequent losses, because to run the engines with the fuel that is supplied is dangerous for the engines, dangerous for the machinery. The machinery might collapse for good. Even the P&I and relevant insurance companies expect that the master gives proper notices and issues proper letters in time.